Welcome to the Seeds of Transformation podcast, where biblical truth meets modern day. I'm your host, Dr. Allma Johnson, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey with you. Here, we'll delve into a myriad of topics from healthcare to finance. Why? Well, everything begins with a seed. Join me and a few keen guests that'll stop by periodically as we explore the power of being a seed sown in shaping our lives and communities. After all, in Jesus' hand, a tiny seed becomes a miraculous testament of faith and growth. So, grab your headphones before you go on your walk or hop on that treadmill, and make sure you turn up the volume in your car and get ready to be inspired, challenged, and encouraged. Let's sow seeds of transformation together and witness the incredible harvest that awaits us on our collective journey. Let us begin. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Seeds of Transformation podcast with your host, Dr. Allma Johnson. I'm so glad you are here today. I want to talk to you for a moment, not in a formal way, just honestly. Listen, have you ever been sure about what God was doing, and then everything went in a completely different direction? Not just a delay, not even a small shift. I mean, it unfolded in a way you did not see coming at all. And it leaves you sitting there trying to make sense of it. Because it's one thing to deal with disappointment, but it's another thing to feel like you don't understand God in that moment. Like something just doesn't add up. Maybe you don't say it out loud, but internally you're asking, did I get this wrong? Did I misunderstand what God was doing? And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. You can believe God, trust God, follow God, and still find yourself confused by Him. That's not new, y'all. That's something we see very clearly in Scripture. There's a moment in the book of Luke, chapter 24, and it's one of the most honest pictures of this, what we're discussing today. This is right after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Two disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. They're not celebrating, they're not hopeful, they're leaving. They had believed Jesus was the Messiah. They had listened to him, watched him, followed him. They had every reason to believe something significant was happening. But then the cross happened. And from their perspective, everything fell apart. And as they're walking, they say something that feels incredibly real. Luke chapter 24 and verse 21 says, "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." We had hoped. Past tense. That one sentence carries so much weight because it reveals something important. They weren't disconnected from God. They just didn't understand what God was doing. They had expectations. They expected deliverance to look a certain way, victory to look a certain way. But when it didn't match what they expected, it felt like everything had gone wrong. And if we're honest, y'all, that's not just their story. That's something many of us experience today. We don't always realize it, but we carry expectations into our relationship with God. We expect, if I'm walking with God, things will go like this. If I'm praying, I'll see this outcome. If I trust Him, it will look like this. And when it doesn't, it creates tension. Not because we stop believing, but because we don't understand. Scripture speaks directly into that tension. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, verses 8 and 9, it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." Y'all, that's not just poetic. That's God making something incredibly clear. He does not operate within limits, especially not the limits of our expectations. And on the cross is the clearest example of that. Because from a human perspective, the cross looked like failure. It looked like loss. It looked like everything had collapsed. The disciples didn't see victory, they saw an ending. But scripture shows us something different. If we look at the book of Acts, chapter 2, and verse 23, that says, "This Jesus you crucified and killed according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God." Hmm. What looked like chaos was actually intentional. What looked like defeat was actually the center of God's plan. But the disciples couldn't see that yet. They were standing inside what God was doing and didn't recognize it. And that's what makes this so real. Because sometimes we're in the middle of something and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't look like what we thought it would. It doesn't even feel like what we expected. And the temptation in those moments is to assume something is wrong. But what if the issue isn't that God is absent? What if the issue is that we don't yet see clearly? Hmm. As those two disciples kept walking, something happens. Jesus himself comes alongside them. He's right there, walking with them, talking with them, and they don't recognize him. Luke chapter 24 and verse 16 says, "But their eyes were kept from recognizing him." But that right there is a powerful detail because it tells us the problem wasn't his presence, it was their perception. He was there. They just didn't see him for who he was. And as they talk, they begin explaining everything that happened, almost like they're explaining it to a stranger. And Jesus listens. Then he responds. But notice how he responds. He doesn't reveal himself right away. He takes them back to scripture. Let's look at Luke chapter 24 and verse 7 that says, "In the beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." He starts connecting the dots, as I like to call it, showing them what had always been right there. Things they had heard before, but didn't fully understand. And then something shifts. Later, they say, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road?" Luke 24 and 32. Something inside them was responding before they fully understood, before they could explain it. And then finally, Luke 24 and 31 says, "Their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Recognition came, but not immediately. Understanding came, but after walking, after listening, after things began to unfold. And I think that matters more than we realize because we want clarity right away. We want things to make sense immediately. But scripture shows us sometimes clarity comes while you're still walking, still processing, still trying to understand. So here's the truth I want you to sit with today. Just because something doesn't match your expectation does not mean it's outside of God's plan. And just because you don't recognize what God is doing right now does not mean he isn't present. Those disciples were walking with Jesus in the middle of their confusion and didn't even realize it. And if we're honest, that's where a lot of people are. Still moving forward, still believing, but trying to figure it out. What's actually real? Because once your expectations are shaken, once you thought something would be, doesn't hold up, you start to see things differently. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to realize not everything is what it seems. And sometimes that's where understanding really begins. So maybe before you try to force clarity, before you try to rush understanding, just stay present. Stay where you are. Keep walking, keep listening. Because God has never required you to understand everything in order to trust Him. And sometimes what feels unclear right now isn't meant to stay that way. Sometimes things are revealed not all at once, but in layers. And over time, what once felt confusing starts to separate. What looked certain may not be. What seemed unclear may begin to sharpen until eventually you're no longer just reacting to what's in front of you, you're beginning to see it for what it actually is. And that kind of clarity doesn't come from rushing, it comes from learning to recognize what's real. Who's real? Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Seeds of Transformation podcast. Before you go, take a moment to share your thoughts with a 5-star review and connect with me on social media. Listen, your feedback fuels growth. Until next time, stay inspired. And as always, keep growing in all things of God.